Hi everyone. It's very nice to see you all. So my name is Leanne, and I am the founder of a blog slash social media page called Polyphilia, where I educate and entertain people with bite-sized content about non-monogamy, polyamory, open relationships, personal growth, and all that jazz. And so today, basically, this is just going to be a run through of what non-monogamy is and isn't. So I'll be talking about the different types of non-monogamous relationships. And I'll also be covering kind of some basic misconceptions, and then finally kind of the pros and cons of entering into a non-monogamous relationship if you're considering kind of learning more about the dynamic or possibly entering into such a relationship. Yeah, next slide, please, Jess. Okay, so essentially, the relationships fall on a spectrum from like total romantic and sexual exclusivity to romantic and sexual non-exclusivity. And exclusivity just basically means, it's the two of you and you're closed to kind of developing further connections with anyone else. So most of you, not all of you, are probably familiar with monogamy, which is what the mainstream society practices. It's where when you enter into a relationship, at some point, you agree that you are exclusive to each other. You don't enter into any relationships with other people. Generally, there are going to be some fairly strict boundaries regarding what you can do with friends. And yeah, so this is generally kind of like agreed on between you, and you just progress from there. And if you want to enter into another relationship, then you have to break off the existing ones. So in like non-monogamy, which is basically anything that is not monogamy, as the name suggests, there's actually quite a wide spectrum of ways in which you can practice it. So basically, I've designed this little spectrum here to give you a visual representation of what that might look like. And the spectrum goes from, monogamy, which is, you have a very kind of strong kind of couple identity. There's very little kind of individual autonomy. And what I mean by that is like whatever you do is agreed on kind of between the two of you. Whereas like as you move further along the spectrum, then you have a bit more individual agency in terms of like the connections that you want to forge and kind of like how much clearance that you need with your partner or partners to progress those connections. So on the furthest left side of non-monogamy, we have a monogamish relationship, which is basically just like monogamy, but you make occasional exceptions for, casual connections, like kind of casual sex and that kind of thing. And so, for example, you might have heard of hall passes, which is basically, you make exceptions if you're like at a party or, you're out at a club and, if you make out with someone that night, it doesn't really matter. And you're basically just monogamous the rest of the time. But kind of, activity outside of the relationship is seen as the exception rather than the norm. That's kind of what defines a monogamish relationship. And then you have swinging. Swinging is typically an activity where couples engage in group sex with other single people or other couples. They may go to sex parties together, and like they engage in casual sex with other people. And so the thing that defines swinging is that it is strictly something that couples do together. So they rarely, sleep with other people alone. They're usually doing it as a pair. Hence, it's why, it's in the middle of kind of the autonomy spectrum on this kind of visual graph. And so then you have an open relationship, which is still kind of romantically exclusive. You still have a romantic identity as a couple and you do not engage in romantic connections outside the relationship. But it's basically total sexual non-exclusivity, where each of you can have, friends with benefits, kind of long-term kind of sexual, but still casual connections with other people. So all three of these are non-monogamous relationships, but they are specifically still relationships where you are romantically exclusive. And then on the furthest end of the relationship spectrum, you have polyamory. So polyamory is the only type of non-monogamy where you engage in multiple romantic connections. So that's what defines it. I get a question a lot where people ask me, what's the difference between non-monogamy and polyamory? And basically, polyamory is under the spectrum of non-monogamy. So it is one type of non-monogamy, but as you can see, there are other types of non-monogamy where, you're not engaging in multiple romantic partnerships. So yeah, so in polyamory, you have total non-exclusivity. Obviously, there are still, boundaries and agreements that you have to adhere to in a relationship, as you do in any relationship. But you and your partners are, you have free reign to engage in romantic connection with multiple people. So I should also say that you can be more than one of these things at the same time. So you can be polyamorous and be open to romantic connection, but you can also enjoy casual sex and group sex and, go swinging with your partner on occasion. So it's not like, if you're polyamorous, then you only engage in romantic connection with multiple people. Like you can enjoy casual sex or group sex or what have you on occasion. They're not mutually exclusive things. But yeah, so this is the spectrum. And within there, like you still have like a wide range of ways in which non-monogamy can be practiced. But yeah, so this is just a general kind of overview. Next slide, please, Jess. So I've compiled a list of common misconceptions that I get in person, online, wherever else, where people have a lot of ideas about what non-monogamy and polyamory is and isn't. And so I thought I'd just kind of go through them in turn. Just by the way, if you have any questions, if you could please put them in the chat. And if it's relevant to kind of what I'm currently saying, then I'll answer it. If not, I will probably address it in the Q&A section at the end of this. Okay, so let's start with the misconception that non-monogamous people never feel jealous. So obviously, if you are a very, very jealous person, and this is something that you really struggle with, you're probably less likely to engage in a non-monogamous relationship because it would be harder for you than it would be for most. But that doesn't mean that if you feel jealousy, non-monogamy just straight up isn't an option for you. There are many people who do experience jealousy and engage in non-monogamous relationships. It's more about how you handle your jealousy and how you process it and, kind of where the jealousy comes from than like, a fixed character trait that means that like this option is just closed off to you forever. So essentially, just because you feel jealousy, it's an emotion. Most people experience it. It doesn't mean that you can't be non-monogamous. And typically, and I could go on a whole different rant about this, but jealousy is often indicative of, needs that you have that are unmet, or something that you haven't communicated with your partner about, or like something that's telling you about your insecurities, your trauma, and that kind of thing. So usually when someone feels jealous in non-monogamy, and I get a lot of queries about this, typically I ask them to do a bit of self-introspection and to think about, like the root of why they're feeling this way. And there's usually a reason behind it. And so yeah, jealousy is not a barrier to non-monogamy, and you can be non-monogamous and absolutely experience jealousy. So to the right, this is another super common one. A lot of people think that if you're non-monogamous and you're engaging in sex or kind of relationships with multiple people, you must be at higher risk of contracting an STI. Now, this seems to make sense on the surface, right? Like if you have more partners, then you're more exposed to kind of various STIs, and therefore you're more likely to get it. But actually, statistics have shown that this is not true. There's a study that was conducted in 2015 by Dr. Justin Lehmiller, and he basically interviewed a bunch of university students and asked them about, like what kind of relationships they engaged in and how much sex they were having and like whether they used protection and how often they got tested. And basically the results that came out from the study was that people who were engaging in non-monogamous relationships were no more or less likely to contract STIs than monogamous people. Now, this may seem surprising, but there are two reasons. So the first reason is that non-monogamous people, because, they engage in like more kind of sexual behavior than monogamous people, they're also more likely to be responsible about testing. So non-monogamous people are more likely to get tested regularly. And so if they do discover that they have an infection, then they disclose this to their partners, and they make sure to take some time out so they don't infect other people, and they keep everyone around them safe. And in non-monogamous relationships, there's generally much more of a culture of honesty and openness and transparency. And so conversations about STIs and protection are much more likely to be discussed and agreed upon between parties. So that's one reason why. And the second reason why is because turns out the monogamous people that he was interviewing were not very good at monogamy. 25% of the monogamous people that he interviewed had sex outside of their monogamous agreement. And most of them, surprisingly, were not using protection. And when they got an infection from that, they didn't tell their partner because they didn't want to tell their partner that they were cheating, and then infected them as a result. And so this study basically showed that non-monogamous people are more likely to have kind of safe sex agreements and actually kind of be open and transparent about how often they're being tested and like whether or not they've been infected with anything, and therefore keep people around them safe. Whereas that didn't seem to be as much the case in monogamous relationships. Another one is that another one I get a lot is that polyamory, non-monogamy is just cheating with permission. Now, I've always seen this as a bit of an oxymoron, because to me, cheating means that cheating requires lying. You're breaking the agreements of relationship, you're going behind their back, you're doing something that's not permissible. So how can it be cheating with permission if everything is honest and open and you all know about it and enthusiastically encourage it and consent to it? So, obviously cheating means different things in different relationships. This is even the case in monogamy. As I said earlier, on the relationship spectrum, like I typically said that, at a certain stage in monogamous dating, you agree to be exclusive. But some people don't even have that conversation. Like at some stage, you get serious enough that you just kind of mutually assume that the other person isn't seeing anyone else. And more than that, lots of people in monogamy have different definitions of what cheating means. So for some people, obviously you're not going to engage in sexual contact with people like outside the relationship in monogamy. But for some people, kind of what about with friends? Like, are you allowed to like cuddle your friends? Are you allowed to spend time with a person of like a different gender alone? Some people have very strict monogamous agreements, and it's usually when that like a boundary is broken that they actually have a conversation about it. And so basically, whenever someone brings up to me that polyamory is cheating with permission, I often ask them, what have you and your partner agreed to be cheating in your monogamous relationship? And often they're just like, oh, well, we never talked about it. And so basically the point I want to bring out from this is that I think it's important to talk about boundaries in your relationships, no matter what kind of relationship you're practicing. So in monogamy, what does your monogamy look like? What are the boundaries of your agreements? What can you do with other people? What is not permissible? What would upset your partner? And to have a conversation about that instead of making assumptions that your partner has the same boundaries as you do, because you might be surprised at how different your perceptions of monogamy may be. So another one is that you're afraid of commitment. So obviously in traditional relationships, commitment means like a certain kind of relationship structure. It means monogamy usually means total exclusivity. It usually means that at some point you plan to get married, perhaps you plan to have children, perhaps you want to live together, get a dog. And there very much is this kind of escalation that you go on in a relationship and you're expected to kind of stay together forever and ever. And so, basically, like I define commitment a bit differently, because, you can live with someone and have kids with someone, be married to someone, but not necessarily be emotionally attuned to them in a relationship. There are many people who are technically committed, but they're also in unhappy relationships. So what commitment means to me is a relationship where two people are looking after each other and listening to each other's needs, like caring for each other, celebrating each other in good times, and supporting each other when you're going through some hard times. And it's about that kind of emotional connection that you have, rather than the things that you are doing to signify, how serious you are about each other. And so, by obviously different people have different definitions of commitment, but then I think a more expansive definition really covers what we actually want, which is love and intimacy and connection and respect and communication. And these things don't actually require monogamy, and you can do that with multiple people. I think another thing about the you're afraid of commitment thing is that a lot of people don't think that non-monogamous relationships can last. But, obviously there isn't that much representation in the media, and you probably don't know that many non-monogamous people. I might be the first non-monogamous person you've ever met. But there are many people who have been doing this for decades, and they've been in 3-person, kind of 4-person, kind of, or whatever kind of massive networks for a very long time. And so it's just about creating your own support network and your chosen family. And that can absolutely last long term, as long as that works for everyone in the relationship. So basically, a more expansive definition of commitment is what's needed, and one that actually covers the emotional significance of relationships, rather than legal and financial commitments like cohabitation and buying a house. Another one is that all non-monogamous people are bisexual. This is absolutely not true. Obviously, I have met a lot of bisexual people in the non-monogamous community. I myself am bisexual, but there are also monogamous bisexual people, and there are straight non-monogamous people. You can be any sexuality and be non-monogamous. There are even asexual people who are non-monogamous, although this is something that I'll cover in a later misconception. So I'll get to that. But yeah, you can be any sexuality, any gender identity, and practice non-monogamy. Then we've got the misconception that opening up a relationship is a sign that there are problems in the relationship. Obviously, there are definitely some people who do this, who resort to non-monogamy because they want to spice things up, and not necessarily because they actually want to solve the issues. And there are definitely people who misuse non-monogamy and its purposes, and generally those relationships fail. Because the thing about non-monogamy is that you have to have a lot of emotional security and confidence to engage in a relationship where your partner is also engaging with other people. I think it's one thing to have multiple partners and enjoy the love and attention and intimacy with multiple people, but it's quite another thing to see the people you love doing that with other people as well. I think that requires some emotional resilience and security and confidence and self-esteem. And so if your relationship isn't solid, if you're in a relationship where you're not 100% sure that your partner is serious about you, perhaps you have a fear of abandonment, perhaps things are rocky, and then they start a new relationship with someone else, and you feel insecure because things aren't like that in your relationship, then the relationship can absolutely fall apart. And so, I think this misconception comes from the many kind of instances where people have used non-monogamy for the wrong reasons. But I'd also like to remind you that people can use monogamy for the wrong reasons as well. You get toxic monogamous relationships quite a lot of the time. People who are overly controlling, people who are very insecure and kind of project their insecurities onto their partner. You get abuse, you get toxicity. All those things are present in all types of relationships. So they're not exclusive to non-monogamy. But there are many good reasons to open up a relationship that don't say anything about the relationship's health. There are I'll get into the pros and cons of entering into non-monogamy in a later slide, but there are many benefits to opening up a relationship, like novelty, excitement, and wanting your partner to get needs met that they can't get met with you, and a bunch of other things. It doesn't say anything about you not being satisfied, or your partner not being enough, or you don't love each other anymore, or things like that. This can happen, but typically in the cases where the relationship is successful, that's not the case. And another point is that not everyone enters into non-monogamy from an existing monogamous relationship. A lot of people approach non-monogamy as a single person. So, you're non-monogamous from day one. Day one of the relationship, you're not exclusive. You will never be exclusive. That was pretty much how I started. And I entered into a polyamorous relationship that I'm still in 3.5 years later, and we were never exclusive at any point during the relationship. And so there was never that point of opening up. There was never that point where we were like, oh yeah, like monogamy is nice, but we're going to do something else now because this is how it's always been. So yeah, obviously there were no problems to fix because we just met. So yeah, there's different ways that you can approach non-monogamy, and opening up doesn't mean that there's issues. So the next one, non-monogamous breakups hurt less because you have other partners. Now, whenever people bring this up to me, I usually counter, if you had, say, 3 children and one of them died in a horrible accident, would you say to the mother, oh, well, it's fine that your kid died, you still have 2 others, right? Obviously not. That would be extremely cruel. And it would not even be remotely true, just because you have, like, you know, other people on your support system and other people who love you doesn't make the loss hurt any less. And I think the main thing here is that the partners of a non-monogamous person are not interchangeable and they're not replaceable. So there's I think there's still this idea that, you know, one of them has to be the favorite, or, like, you know, you like some more than the others, or they're all the same because they serve the same function. But, you know, you're engaging with people, you're not engaging with need-filling machines. When you're in a relationship, you care about the individual and you care about the connection that is unique and special to you. So, you know, when people engage, whenever people engage in non-monogamy and you know, they open themselves up vulnerably to multiple connections, sometimes, you know, they do experience breakups, and that can hurt a lot. And it can even be more difficult because, you know, you can't just like hide away for 2 weeks and eat ice cream and watch movies and just be an introvert. Like, you have to maintain your existing relationships while you're going through this breakup. So in some ways, non-monogamous breakups can actually hurt more because there is this difficulty of, you know, managing your existing connections as well. Okay. So related to the earlier point about cheating with permission, there's another misconception that it's impossible to cheat in a non-monogamous relationship, or that some people even said that if everyone was non-monogamous, then cheating would be fixed. No one would cheat anymore. And that's just not the case. Like I said, cheating is when you break agreements in a relationship, and non-monogamous relationships still have agreements that can be broken. So classic example is protection when it comes to STIs. So to use a personal example, me and my partner, my anchor partner, we use condoms with other people, and whereas like we don't with each other. And we make an agreement that if one of us wants to stop using condoms with other people, then we would have a discussion and, you know, change the agreement in that sense. Whereas if they went behind my back and just had condomless sex with someone else, unprotected sex with someone else, and didn't tell me about it and potentially exposed me to a risk, then I would feel very violated and I would feel cheated on. So it is absolutely possible to cheat in a non-monogamous relationship. And more than that, some people just like to lie. Some people, for whatever reason, you know, enjoy kind of violating their partner's boundaries and, you know, disrespecting the agreements that they have. And people like that exist in non-monogamy as well. So even if everyone were engaging in open relationships of some kind in this fantasy world, there would still be people who lie and cheat and break agreements. So non-monogamy is not a fix or like a cure for kind of just existing problems in people, because it is a relationship style, is not a cure-all. Okay, on the bottom left, you must date your partner's other partners. Now, this is an important one because I don't know how much you all know about non-monogamy, but if you have been exposed to it, I would hazard a guess that you have probably seen a throuple in the media. So a throuple is a polyamorous relationship where all three people are dating each other. It comes from the word three and couple, hence throuple. And from that, because for some reason the media is completely obsessed with throuple relationships, there is this idea that it's not polyamory unless you are dating the other people that your partner is dating. This isn't true. You don't have to date your partner's other partners. Just like you don't have to be friends with your friend's other friends. You don't have to date the people that your partner is involved with if you just don't vibe that way or if you're not attracted to them. Like I said earlier, not all non-monogamous people are bisexual. So, you know, if a bisexual person, say, was dating a straight man and a lesbian, the straight man and lesbian would obviously not be dating each other. And even if everyone was bisexual, they might not be attracted to each other. They might not be each other's type. They might be friends. They might, you know, go to like celebrate like their shared partner's birthday together and spend Christmas together and that kind of thing, but they don't have to date. And so there are many relationship structures within polyamory that can take place. And, you know, some of them are kind of closed thruples, like I said. Some of them are Vs, which is where one person's dating two people, they're not dating each other. You can have quads, which is 4 people, they're all dating each other in some kind of configuration. Or you can have like whatever configuration you want. You can have like great networks that span across countries and continents. It's just whatever you want it to be. So yeah, like you don't have to date your partner's other partners. Like you can have whatever relationship with them that you and them are comfortable with. So in the bottom, in the middle, we've got all non-monogamous people are slutty and they love group sex and orgies. Now, obviously, there's nothing wrong with group sex and orgies. There's nothing wrong with enjoying casual sex and group sex. But not all non-monogamous people are into that. You can be any sexuality and be non-monogamous, like I said. You can be asexual and polyamorous. So you can engage in multiple romantic connections, but without any or very little sex happening with each of your romantic partners. And some people might enjoy having one-on-one relationships with multiple people, but they might not enjoy having them all together in the same room. They might not enjoy being in the bedroom with multiple, or like with all of them at the same time. You can absolutely have kind of relationships running in parallel without kind of everyone being involved with each other. So, you don't have to be you don't have to engage in group sex if you don't want to. You don't have to go to sex parties you don't want to. You could not engage in sex at all and still be polyamorous. Now, obviously, like if you're a swinger, then like that's kind of what swinging is. You go and have group sex, you go and have orgies. But then, like the frequency of this really depends on the individual person. And yeah, I guess like the word slutty can be defined in a number of ways. And typically I think it's a very denigrating word that people don't really use that much anymore. But yeah, basically there's great diversity in kind of sexual preferences among people who are non-monogamous. I've just gotten a question from someone that said, is it still polyamory if it is a V configuration, or would this be a bi-directional open relationship? So a V relationship where one person is dating two people, that is absolutely a polyamorous relationship because one person is engaging in multiple romantic connections. So by definition, that is polyamory. However, having said that, if the two people that they're dating are not dating anyone else and are happy that way, it would be like that would be called like a mono-poly relationship where one person is monogamous, the other person is polyamorous. And as long as everyone is happy in that arrangement, it absolutely works. So there is an influencer called Saskia Mikowski. She lives in Germany and she's bisexual and she has a husband and a girlfriend. And her girlfriend is a lesbian and her husband is straight. And her husband and girlfriend both identify as monogamous. And they live together. I think they've been together for a couple of years now. They're planning on having children together. And so, yeah, it is a polyamorous relationship, but there can be monogamous people within a polyamorous dynamic, if that makes sense. And that leads very conveniently on to my last misconception, which is you can't be non-monogamous and have children. So non-monogamous people are just like anyone else. They have jobs, they have lives, and they can absolutely kind of build families with multiple partners. So some people choose to have like one partner who they build a family with, and both of them kind of occasionally see other people. Or you can have arrangements like the one I just described, where three or more people raise kids together. And so, I think it's more about the support and consistency of support that is being given to the children, rather than whatever relation the parents have to each other. I mean, if you think about it, we already have multi-parent families. There are many people whose parents are divorced and they have step parents and they raise the kids together. Or some families, in Chinese culture, for me, it's very common for 3 generations to live in a single home and for the kids to be raised by their grandparents. So there's already so many existing structures where like a child is being raised by multiple people and not just their biological parents. It's just in polyamory, like the relation that those people have to each other might be a little bit different, but as long as they're consistent and they have like agreements about like how they want to raise the child together, and they're not just like coming in and out and like not being like reliable sources of support, raising children in a non-monogamous relationship is absolutely possible. And there are many examples of families on the internet who are living this life and doing so very, very happily. So that's all the misconceptions I'm going to cover today. So next slide, Jess. Okay, so now we're going to get into the pros and cons of non-monogamy. So obviously this is something that is very individual, and I think like the cost benefit analysis, so to speak, is going to be, like a unique thing for each individual person. For me, like I did the cost benefit analysis and found that non-monogamy was better for me. For some people, the cost might outweigh the rewards and they choose monogamy. And there are even some people who don't feel that it's a choice. Some people feel very naturally non-monogamous, and even if they wanted monogamy, they wouldn't be able to do it. There is still a debate about like, whether being non-monogamous is an identity or a choice. And I think it's more a personality thing than anything else. Like to me, being monogamous or non-monogamous is kind of like being an introvert or an extrovert. I mean, it's something like, you could get an introvert to go out to a party and like talk to people for hours and hours. They would be able to do it. They might feel uncomfortable though. But it's not like a fixed kind of sexual orientation in the same way that being gay or being bisexual, or, gender identity, like being trans is. I think it's just one of those things where like some people are more attuned to it than others. But that's my personal take, and other people may have different opinions on that. But yeah, let's get to the pros and cons. So like I said before, one of the pros of non-monogamy is that you have generally more variety, novelty, and excitement, because if you're engaging with multiple people, you can learn different things from your partners. Maybe they have interests that you otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to. Maybe they're working in a job that you don't know anything about. And so you get to learn all these things and be influenced by them, and perhaps even bring what you've learned in one relationship into another. So, for example, let me think. Say you and your partner really enjoy, I don't know, playing video games. And that is something that you do as a bonding activity. And then you engage in another relationship with someone who is a professional dancer, and they teach you how to dance. And you discover that dancing is something that you really enjoy. And it's something that you'd like to incorporate into your other relationships, because you enjoy like, learning new moves and dancing to music and like building routines and intimacy with someone like through this kind of artistic endeavor. And then so you go back to your other partner and go like, let's do a dancing class, let's do salsa, or I don't know, something else. And if they enjoy it as well, then you can engage in that together. Or if not, if your video game playing partner doesn't enjoy dancing, you can still enjoy that with someone else. So it's about kind of getting different things from different people, learning different things with different people, having those things influence each other, and basically just keeping things exciting. I'm willing to bet that you're probably less likely to be bored long-term in a non-monogamous relationship, just because of the people you'll be interacting with and exposing yourself to on a regular basis. So another thing is that there's more flexibility long-term if you're in a non-monogamous relationship. So, you can have periods where you have just one partner because you're busy with work or other responsibilities and you don't necessarily want to see anyone else at the moment. And then other times when you're more open to it, you can engage with other people. And so, yeah, you can kind of like have multiple partners, one partner, no partners, and there's much more flexibility in that way. And you can kind of design it to like whatever is suiting you best at the time. Whereas in monogamy, you only get one or you get none, and that's kind of it. And so, yeah, kind of more flexibility in kind of the agreements you can have, your openness to new connections and that kind of thing long term. Another thing is that I have personally found that you build deeper connections with your partners and a better support network if you're in a non-monogamous relationship, purely because for me, like not only do I have a kind of like very fulfilling and enriching connections with my lovers, but also I have had deeper connections with my friends. In monogamy, I was under kind of very strict rules with my monogamous partner at the time on like what I could and couldn't do with friends. I could only express my platonic affection in certain ways, otherwise it would kind of upset my partner's boundaries. And without, in a non-monogamous dynamic, without that fear, without that kind of anxiety that, oh, like if I kind of express myself too affectionately, my partner might get upset. I've been able to much more authentically experience and express my affection for my friends, and kind of develop like a much more organic and genuine connection as a result. But this point is kind of more personal to me than anything else. Obviously, you can build very deep connections in monogamy. It just looks a little bit different. Another pro is that you experience something called compersion. So we had the jealousy conversation earlier, obviously, being jealous doesn't mean that you can't be non-monogamous. But some non-monogamous people, not all, but some, experience compersion, which is a feeling of happiness that you get when you see your partner engaging with other people. This is not a prerequisite to non-monogamy, but it certainly makes it easier. I mean, like if you're happy seeing your partner with other people rather than feeling really anxious and jealous all the time, you might be more inclined to practice non-monogamy. So it's a very nice feeling. I think it's this joy, like seeing your partner receive love and affection from multiple people and being happy for them, and therefore kind of feeling like happy and happiness and joy within yourself as well. So that's a very unique perk that I think you don't really get in monogamy. And finally, you get more opportunities to learn things about yourself, to grow as a person, and to develop skills in relationships. As I said, you need quite a lot of self-esteem and confidence to engage in non-monogamous relationships long term. And basically, practicing it is a way to kind of improve those things. So, working through your insecurities and learning more about your interests and desires, and like communicating with multiple people at the same time. These are all things that will like enrich your life and kind of build skills that are applicable to multiple scenarios. So now to the cons. So then in terms of cons, I think a big one is that you have a much smaller dating pool. The fact is that most people are monogamous, and most people who are monogamous want mutually monogamous relationships. And so if you are a non-monogamous person, you are committed to non-monogamy, most people are not going to want to date you. Most people are not going to be compatible with you. And so some people might struggle with that, particularly if you're already of another marginalized identity, or for whatever reason, your dating pool is already small as it is. If you're queer, for example, that's going to shrink the pool by a quite significant amount. But this is not insurmountable. There are dating apps that you can use to find specifically non-monogamous people. There are non-monogamous meetups that you can attend. And so it's just about finding your community and finding that niche, even if you can't kind of meet people like in the wild, I guess, like most people can. But everyone uses dating apps anyway, so I don't know if this is as much of an issue now than it used to be. Another thing is societal judgment and stigma. As you probably guessed, like from my previous slide, I get people saying all kinds of stuff all the time that is just vastly untrue about non-monogamy. And so, I think there is some emotional resilience that you need to deal with if you're going to be non-monogamous, and in particular, openly non-monogamous. A lot of people aren't going to understand. There isn't necessarily a societal, I guess, infrastructure to support non-monogamous relationships, though this is changing very slowly. And yeah, like, you might receive judgment and perhaps even hatred from friends and family who don't support or don't agree for whatever reason. In a way, I think it's very similar to being queer. So my experience, being openly non-monogamous was very similar to me coming out as bisexual. In some ways, it was worse because people understood bisexuality more than they understood non-monogamy. So there is that to contend with, and I think some people might not be able to handle the stigma. Another thing is that you might have less time, because as much as your ability to love and connect with others can be theoretically infinite, we all have 24 hours in a day. And so particularly if you have other responsibilities, say you have a job, you have kids, like whatever else, you're going to have to very meticulously organize your time in order to make non-monogamy work. So some people are very good planners, some people are very good at organizing their time, and in that way this isn't a barrier to them. For others it may be. So I think this is something to consider for sure. And something I mentioned earlier was, non-monogamy offers the opportunity for personal growth. But on the other hand, the other side of the coin is that you have to have a lot of conversations. You have to have a lot of conversations with people about your boundaries, to communicate agreements, to respect each other's privacy, to talk about how much you want to disclose about one relationship to another relationship. There's all kinds of conversations you're going to have. And for some people, this can be very intellectually exciting. For some people, this is going to be very demanding. So then, I think it depends on like how much you're willing to take on a challenge, I guess, and kind of what communication skills you already have in place and how much effort you're willing to put in to kind of, improve your skills in that sense. But that is difficult for a lot of people. And at the end of the day, if you're engaging with multiple people, that's going to be more difficult than engaging with one. And finally, there's working through jealousy. As I said, not necessarily a barrier, but if you're someone who tends to feel more jealousy than the average person, it's going to be a struggle. Whereas if you're someone who feels more compersion, then you might struggle with it a bit less. So yeah, but like I said at the very beginning, the cost benefit analysis is entirely up to you. For some people, like there might be a lot of costs, but the potential rewards and the outcomes are worth it for them. Some people might pursue non-monogamy for philosophical reasons. They might believe in, freedom of connection. They might believe like in the idea of like free love. And even if it's difficult, they think that it's worth kind of, working through all of that in order to achieve the life that they want to live. For some people, non-monogamy is simply just who they are, and it is something that they will do no matter how difficult it is. And some people might ask, well, there's so many cons. Like, how is it worth it? And just because something is difficult, it doesn't mean that it's not worth doing or that it's not rewarding. Parenting is difficult. Having kids is undoubtedly challenging, right? But people do it because of the rewards. They feel like they're like serving something bigger than themselves. They like the idea of having a child, and they like the idea of having someone to look after and love. And yeah, they want to kind of contribute in that way to the universe. And so yeah, people like to take on challenges, and just because something's difficult doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it or that it can't be done. Next slide, please, Jess. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. So let's have a look at the time. Oh, perfect. Okay, we've got about 13 minutes for questions. Yeah, like if any of you have any questions for me, then I'd be happy to answer them about absolutely anything about polyamory, non-monogamy, open relationships, about my personal life, as long as it's relevant to the topic. Yeah, thank you for listening.